and welcome to this week's Talking Lower League with Talking Boys. Another week, we're still getting over the trauma, if you will, well, for Clyde fans, but just the general excitement and trauma of the lower leagues in full coming back at the weekend. What a beautiful sight that was. And we've got loads to get through on this week's podcast, so please excuse us if we have to rush through certain things. We will do our best to cover everything that we possibly can. We're going to be chatting about the Scottish Cup, which is taking place this week. We're going to be chatting about some of the key standout results that happened from the weekend. And we're also going to be cherry picking at some of the upcoming fixtures this coming weekend in the lower leagues that stand out as well as answering your questions, of course. So plenty for us to get through. And I am thrilled, beyond thrilled. I'm nearly crying with joy. I've been joined by my good friend Ross Gray. And it will be Ross and I who will be taking you through this week. I'm sure Alistair will return soon. Legal matters will be put to the side for him to return next week. Anyway, right, Ross, let's just get right into it because we've got loads to cover, as I mentioned. Let's just kick off with the Scottish Cup. Obviously, we're recording on the Tuesday night, on the 23rd of March. The games kick off in around an hour, so we're going to be doing our best to finish up and going to watch what we can. So, Ross, I really just wanted to just kind of briefly chat to you about this and really ask you what your tie around is tonight. You know, what game really stands out for you in the Scottish Cup this week?
Yeah. Try that again because Dylan muted me. For me, it might not be the most obvious potential banana skin, but I am going to probably incorrectly hang my hat on Buckie Thistle against Inverness Caledonian Thistle. You know, Inverness, obviously, I don't know if you've picked it as your game, but it's not mine, so I'll just say it anyway. I had a good result the weekend in the championship, but they still at times look a little bit shaky for me. Buckie Thistle, obviously, their season is unfortunately over. The Highland League has been called, so you know they may want to take a good run at this competition. And with Inverness not playing particularly well, maybe looking a little bit kind of bereft of confidence, this could be the banana skin for me. I think this sticks out probably more than most. It's maybe not the standout, but I think it's definitely up there as the potential proverbial banana skin for our SPFL teams. Yeah,
Ross, and just right off the bat, before I come back there with a generic football comment, I want to apologise for muting you there. It's nothing personal. It was an accident. Okay, yeah, for me, Buckie versus Inverness, 8 o'clock kick-off on Tuesday night. It is a standout as well. I think that as much as whatever you might think of Neil McCann, I'm really glad to see Inverness coming back into a wee bit of form, starting to climb away from the relegation spots in the championship, which I'm sure we'll get onto in the next section of the podcast. Your prediction starting to come right as well, Ross, a few weeks ago that you said there was no chance that Inverness would get relegated, and it seems that you have been the motivating factor behind the rise in the last couple of weeks. But really just want to kind of piggyback off on your comments there about the Highland League sides. I mean, there's still a good few involved this week in the Scottish Cup, Ross. You know, Buckie Thistle at home to Inverness. Obviously, Keith against Clyde, that will be the game that we'll be keeping an eye on.
I'm not going to talk about Clyde at all this week. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, well, we've actually had some people write in to say, please don't speak about them. So
I've had a relatively good week so far, so I'm not going to fucking ruin it now.
Well, unfortunately, we will be watching that this evening. But also the likes of Huntly going to Dumbarton. And for me, Ross, the standout game includes another Highland League side, and that's Nairn County at home to Montrose. You know, Montrose side that obviously went down to Falkirk at the weekend. And we spoke about it, Ross. You know, a Falkirk side that it was probably the hardest game that Montrose could have got to return with. And I don't think it will hamper them too much in their return and their ambitions for the remainder of the season. But for me, Nairn County have always been a side I've been impressed with. Always, you know, putting up a good fight in the Highland League, competing with the best sides, competing with the likes of Bahora Rangers. Obviously, they're at home to Hearts. That's another standout game. But for me, Nairn versus Montrose could well be one that, yet again, could be a bit of a banana skin. So I'm quite glad, actually, that we both got Highland League sides in our games of the week for the Scottish Cup. And see, to be honest, let's hope as many of them get through as possible. I don't want to get into the logistics of testing and costs and things like that. I just want to see Highland League sides get a chance to play these big games this season, because they have been hampered so much by everything that's going on. So good luck to all of them. And yeah, it's brilliant to look tonight and see all these Scottish Cup ties taking place. So if we didn't speak about your game, don't worry, because obviously in next week's podcast, we're going to be doing our best to get through and chat about as many of the Scottish Cup results as possible, as well as look forward to the third round as well. Right, Ross, straight to it with chatting about some of the standout results from the return of the full card of the lower leagues at the weekend. And obviously we're kicking off in the Championship. I'm going to go back to you with this one. What was your standout result?
See, there were two for me, so I suspect you'll have the other one. So I'll stick with Inverness Caledonian Thistle. They also won 1-0 at East End Park against Dunfermline. David Carson winning the game late on for Inverness. You talked there about Neil McCann. I really rate Neil McCann as a pundit. I think he talks a lot of sense. He actually comes across, unlike a lot of pundits in Scottish football, like he knows what he's talking about, understands football. And I feel sometimes when he's in managerial roles, it doesn't come across on the pitch, be it tactically, players don't buy into his system, his philosophy, whatever it may be. But I think him knowing that he's coming in short term and what is a relatively high profile job, considering he's been out of football management for about a year, maybe longer than that now. So I think he's starting to make a good impression. As I said, even before he was appointed, I think it was I said to you, there's no chance Inverness are going down. And, I said it before, this Dunfermline side, like Dundee, their confidence is just absolutely paper thin, I feel. And they were there for the taking. And you look at it now, Inverness sit currently 5th, 27 points, 5 clear of Arbroath in 9th place. They'll be absolutely fine, And it was a decent performance. I think probably the wheels are starting to turn a little bit now. They may kick into gear just in time to potentially push into the playoffs, but it remains to be seen. There's a lot of teams more in form around them and playing a bit better, so we'll see. But certainly a big confidence booster, and that's opening that gap away from them in the bottom of the table.
They'll be chuffed with that, Ross, and I think it will be a massive relief for not just Neil McCann and the supporters, but Scott Gardner as well. Obviously, the chief executive of Inverness. It was a big call bringing in Neil McCann, obviously, to into that position whilst John Robertson's away. So no, fair play to everybody involved there, and I'm really glad to see them. And I'm sure they'll be chuffed, Ross, if they just manage to finish comfortably mid-table, get this season out of the way, and have a full summer to get everybody back together, bring in their transfer targets, and get that kind of cohesion. Everything that Inverness have been known for in the last few years, they want to get that back. So definitely no, great one to pick, Ross. I don't know whether this was the other one you were going to go for, but I'm hoping it is. I'm going to go for the game that took place at Capello, and that's Greenock Morton 2, Queen of the South 1. You're nodding your head. I'm glad to hear it.
Pleased to say
obviously,
it was, yeah.
First victory for Gus McPherson in his new job, and it certainly does ease their relegation worries. Obviously, they got off to a good start the first 20 minutes. A player that I've always rated. I know some people might come back and go, what are you talking about here? But Aidan Nesbitt obviously opening the scoring. I think he's a cracking wee player. And yeah, just obviously went on to win 2-1 against the Queen of the South side that, I guess in comparison to how they've been getting on, have been a little bit of a poor run. Obviously, they've now suffered back-to-back defeats, and they've kind of slipped out of that playoff promotion zone. But I mean, everything's so tight that everything can just change in a matter of days in the Championship. So I don't think they'll get too disheartened by it. And I'm sure, considering where they were at the tail end of 2020, they'll be absolutely thrilled with where they are now. And I think that Alan Johnson's side, despite obviously, getting beat here against a side that they'll probably roughly evenly matched with this season, they shouldn't be too disheartened. I do think that Morton will be fine under Gus McPherson. I do think they will go from strength to strength next season, on and off the park, if they manage to keep that management team in place and bring in the transfer targets and get more stability around the club. But yeah, no, a great result for Morton, one that keeps them afloat, if you will, above that. But I think Morton fans, and I'm sure everybody looking around, they are desperate for consistency. desperate for a wee bit of consistency to get a wee run going. I mean, obviously, we've mentioned, obviously, we've got Morton supporting friends in the podcast, and they're not even looking for the promotion playoffs. They're just looking to finish comfortably and get everything sorted over the summer. So this win certainly helps them do that anyway, Ross, as well. And like I say, obviously, not to ignore other games, of course. You know, I know Dundee obviously getting a good victory on Friday night as well, and Hearts going to Gayfield drawing 0-0. We've had a couple of Hearts questions in, so we'll get to them. But yet again, another good weekend in the Championship. Right, Ross, back to the returning League One and League Two, and I'm going to start us off with my result of the weekend from League One, and I'm actually going to go for Dumbarton 0, Forfar 1. Now, I'm not just going for it because of the arguably the most viral moment of the season. Obviously, that, if you've not seen it, please go and find footage from the official channels, and not from publications that steal people's work. Can we just add in there as well? Because it's very clear to see big publications stealing the work of local journalists who were at that game and things like that. So always make sure, if you can, to click through the local journalists and local papers and things like that, and give them the support. But yeah, go and look out the footage, because oh my, I mean, talk about a rusty return. I mean, that was just an absolute calamity. But I mean, on the back of that, Ross, I mean, as daft as this might sound, was that the type of thing that Forfar needed to really hit the ground? Because they have had a poor season. We were making the assumption that they were probably going to prop up the table, and now this completely turns that on its head. I mean, sometimes you need things like that to go in your favour before you can really, go and do better things. Do you think that might be the case?
Yeah. Funnily, my game of the week has similar kind of ramifications for the bottom of the table, so I won't say too much just now. But what I will say is, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes clubs just need that kind of rub of the green, that absolutely bizarre goal that can just completely turn the season on its head. Jim Duffy spoke after the game, just basically put his hands up and said, what can you do? You look at the kind of stats from the game, I believe Dumbarton were relatively in control of possession. Not many shots on target, that I'm sure many will be shocked to hear in Dumbarton versus Forfar, and what was a okay Saturday conditions wise. But yeah, two teams that are relatively struggling in League One, and just what can you do? What can you say other than it was just a mixture of manic and chaotic and almost poetically Scottish football? It was just tremendous.
All the things we've missed about League One, Ross, and it certainly arguably drags Dumbarton right back into that relegation fight. We obviously, they did a crank. They were up there in the playoff spots, maybe just kind of sitting around 5th and 6th, and now obviously they're slowly but surely starting to drag themselves back into that, just with that one result, with obviously Forfar now leapfrogging Clyde, who are now sitting at the foot of the table. Ross, your standout result from League One?
Okay, I might be greedy and take up two games here and try to explain my broader point, but I'll be quick.
Ross, there's never been any rules here. Just do what you like.
You're right. It's me that edits the podcast, so ultimately I'll decide. Yeah. So the game I'm going to talk about first and foremost is Peterhead's cracking home win against Airdrie. I think a lot of people on the restart expected Peterhead to maybe struggle here. I know within the Airdrie support there was maybe a bit of expectation this could be a banana skin. Certainly, obviously, it's turned out that way. A good goal from Jordan Brown to get Peterhead the winner, and Jim McNally will be absolutely rubbing his hands, not just at the prospect of taking on John Collins again in a verbal head-to-head, but also at the fact his team are now slowly pulling themselves away from the bottom of the League One table. In short, it's a really, really cracking 3 points for Peterhead, who I said at the start of the season I expected them to struggle, and so far I've been proven wrong. Might not have got all the results they needed, but played relatively well by all accounts. If they can keep grinding out results like this, they will be comfortable. Maybe not in play promotion mix, but certainly comfortable surviving. I think for me, this weekend was the absolute worst case scenario that Clyde could have had, and that Peterhead won 4-1, albeit in absolutely mysterious circumstances. It has been an absolute disaster of a weekend for Clyde, an absolute disaster. As I said, I don't want to talk about Clyde too much, but I think there's a lot of soul searching has to go on at that club, if I'm being honest, and that's pretty much all I'll say is there's a lot of questions that need to be answered around recruitment, basically just everything that's going on around the club. And as I say, that's all I'm going to say about Clyde from pretty much now on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you can kind of tell that from the Clyde supporters and their comments. There's a lot of exhaustion, it seems, around what's going on at Clyde at the moment. This might be the long-term goal and ambition and objectives for Clyde, what they're doing off the park, but it's not working at the moment. And it's a lot of soul searching, Ross, before Clyde end up back in League Two for another decade. That's the last thing we want. I'm going to hop on the why is Griffin Sabatini not starting train that a lot of Airdrieonians fans have been getting a late. We mentioned it earlier on in the season, Ross. I watched quite a lot of Airdrie, as you know, in the first few weeks of the season. Sabatini is one of the best midfielders I've seen in that position in this league for a long time. He does remind me a lot of, and I refer to him a lot, which is just quite emotional, Ray Grant. He's kind of cool, composed, calm, but he can at times. He just reads the game brilliantly, and I'm just very confused as to why he's not getting in the side. Like I said, I don't watch Airdrieonians every week. Try and watch as much as I can, but he's a player that's always stood out for me, and yeah, let's hope that he can get as much game time in the lower leagues as possible, because I don't think he'll be around for that long, to be honest with you.
No, I don't think so. It is a bit of a head scratcher, to be honest, as to why one of their most talented players isn't playing, especially when they are so inconsistent. I'm going to pose a quick question to you about Airdrie, if I may, just before we move on. Are Airdrie, I think I've asked this before, but are Airdrie becoming the Dundee of League One? In that they go on these good runs, it looks as if it's all going to start clicking into place, they're going to push for promotion, and then results like this crop up, and that's they start a downward spiral. How much longer do you think, if a run like this starts to continue for Airdrie now on the restart, how long does Ian Murray have left? Because it seems to me that potentially, the patience may be starting to run out a little bit for the Airdrie support.
And the Airdrie support, the Airdrieonians support that obviously our good friend Rowan obviously keeps us involved with. They're demanding, but why shouldn't they be? Do you know what I mean? They are a hybrid side. They're a big club in League One, and they have been desperate to get out of that division for years and years, and they just cannot seem to do it. And it seems to be year after year, they seem to fall at the hurdle of the playoffs as well. There's alarmingly quite a lot of parallels with Dundee's recent inconsistency, and obviously the kind of up-down nature of the job that James McPake's in, and that of Ian Murray. Ross, you're absolutely spot on. I think Murray will definitely get to the end of the season, but if they don't make the playoffs, for example, I do think it is I don't want to say disaster, but it will be a disaster for the Airdrieonian support, and it would be considering how they have been in and around those positions for most of the season. So no, I think, to be honest, Ross, to attempt to answer your question, a lot of parallels there, and I do think the Airdrieonians will make the playoffs. However, I'm not convinced that they'll go up. But if they make the playoffs, I can see Murray getting another crack at it. That's the way I see things working out, ultimately.
That's fair. I think, to be honest, for me, they have to. When they have players the calibre of Robert and Sabatini there, this is as good a chance as any they're going to get. They have to both be properly utilised in the squad, be starting every week, and, they have to have them on the pitch, and they will produce the magic that Airdrie need. So I think as long as that continues, I think that we'll hear the impatience start to grow and grow. Well,
when you're bringing in, Airdrieonians are a cracking example of a side that I think have used the loan market incredibly well since the restart, bringing in Kyle Turner from Dunfermline. Dunfermline fans were bamboozled when he was getting loaned out. He was one of their top performers only a few months ago, and bringing in experience like Paul Payton. Paul Payton signing on at Airdrie to the rest of the season. I'm sure that a team like Clyde would be crying out for somebody like him. But like I say, we could go down a rabbit hole with that one. Ross, before we move on from League One, is there anything else you want to talk about, or are you quite happy to move on to League Two?
I would just like to make a quick mention for Callum Morrison's second, or Falkirk's second, but Callum Morrison's goal in their win over Montrose. Just a cracking layoff for Anton Dowds, just gave Callum Morrison right into his feet, took a touch, extra 5 yards right past the keeper, just a really good goal. I'm going to say a proper winger's goal.
Yeah, it is, and I'm really looking forward to it, which I was going to say, I'm preempting the fact that Falkirk will be lifting the trophy, but I think Morrison will be in the Championship whether Falkirk are there or not. Next season, to be honest, might even be a wee bit higher. He's a player that every time I've watched him for Falkirk this season, he's just impressed. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how him and Falkirk got on over the course of the rest of this season. Right, Ross, moving on to League Two. It was brilliant to have League Two back at the weekend there. And I'm just going to flip to you again first, if that's all right. What results stood out for you in League Two?
I was going to pick Edinburgh City's 2-1 win over Elgin City, but I get really angry at the fact that Elgin bust my coupon, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm instead going to talk about what was a really good weekend for Stirling Albion, coupled with Edinburgh City's win over Elgin. They beat Brechin 1-0 at Forth Bank, and that has propelled them up to second in the league. By 3 points as well, I may add, over at Elgin and Stranraer beneath them. For me, it's maybe not the most classic result. Everybody's talked about Brechin till they're blue in the face about, that they've just been absolutely in free fall. As we've talked about, made a couple of what look like on paper, a couple of really good signings, some experience, some young guys in to kind of bolster their numbers. And 1-0's not a horrible result for Brechin. I think potentially there may be signs there that they will be okay. I'm going to say maybe not okay, but I think they could end up finishing 9th. They could get themselves out of that relegation playoff. But yeah, for me, Stirling Albion, as we've talked about all season, just really just steaming ahead. I think they feel they kind of have the ascendancy of the teams in the playoffs. I think, we've talked about Elgin a lot, but I think Stirling Albion could go as a bit of a dark horse actually into the playoffs. So it remains to be seen, but certainly, they've got a decent squad on paper. They seem to have that pretty much every year, but I think having Andy Ryan back in there again is a phenomenal bit of business. And yeah, it's just an overall great result for them and a great weekend.
Yeah, agreed, Ross. And obviously we're recording the Tuesday night, so maybe a little bit out of date by the time everybody listens, but really looking forward to seeing how they got on against Raith Rovers tonight. They're obviously at home to Raith in the Cup, so that'll be an interesting one as well. Obviously, I'm going to go for your coupon buster, I'm afraid, Ross, and I think it might have been a coupon buster for a lot of people. And what a cracking start to life at Edinburgh City for Gary Naismith, going to Borough Briggs and coming away with all 3 points, a 2-1 victory. Obviously flying out the traps, going 2-0 up in the first 15 minutes. Peters pulling one back for Elgin City, but ultimately it wasn't enough. What seemed like a relatively even game as well, just from the possession standpoint, shots, corners, things like that. And yeah, I think that could be an incredibly important win for Edinburgh City in their hunt for the playoffs, because there was potentially a little bit of a gap emerging if they weren't going to get 3 points from the game on Saturday there, and it's just completely opened the playoffs right back up. And alongside that, Ross, I know you've spoke about them a few times this season, but Stenhousemuir's victory over Albion Rovers as well at home is, Stenhousemuir are, not too far away from trying to chase the likes of Stranraer and Elgin in that kind of third and fourth spot. It may be a little bit of a stretch for them. I don't think we've said that it probably will be a bit of a stretch for them, but that result there, coupled with other ones that happened in the league, has really, opened up the League Two playoff race, which is incredibly welcome. And it certainly seems that even before a split takes place, the split is practically already taken place in League Two, going by the table and what it looks like just now. But couldn't have asked for a more perfect start for Naismith at Edinburgh City against, obviously, for me, it's practically been my team of the season in Elgin City. So yeah, very interesting to see how those sides really got on over the course of the remainder of the season. Right, Ross, as we touched on at the start of the show, still got a lot to get through, got some questions to get through. So let's fire through our thoughts for this coming weekend in the lower leagues, and let's start off with the Championship. I'm going to kick us off here and go for the game that's really catching my eye, and it has to be Dundee at home to Dunfermline.
I'm going to call it the inconsistency derby.
The inconsistency derby. If you heard Crawford's comments at the end of the Dunfermline game at the weekend, he was fuming, and he's usually quite calm and composed, and he still was, I guess. But I mean, you could just tell, there's a few Dunfermline fans saying that as well. For example, David Buke over at the Talk Scottish Football podcast, Dunfermline fan, he was saying that as well. And if you listen to it, you can definitely tell Dundee a much needed win against Alloa on Friday night, just past there. And one of these sides has to get consistency going into the playoffs. Ross, I'm just taking the words out of your mouth here, but that's exactly what has to happen. And I think this could go either way. And that is what I'm really looking forward to. It's Saturday, 7:20 kick-off on Saturday night. I need to double check whether that's maybe a televised game.
Imagine that'll be on BBC Alba. That'll be why that kick-off is.
Yeah, it may well be on BBC, Ross, because usually obviously it's the Friday night, but maybe for some reason the Saturday night, but obviously it's an international break as well, so maybe schedules are, don't know why all of a sudden we're television producers, but yeah, no, it's I'm really looking forward to that game, and I think if either side have got any hopes of going into the playoffs as the favourites and with that momentum, then these are the types of games that they have to win. So for me, that's a standout. Ross, what about you?
I will go for... I've tried not to talk about Hearts this season, but I will. I'm going to go for Hearts at home to Queen of the South. I believe there's a question about Hearts, so I'll try not to destroy my own rationale before we've had the question, but I honestly think that for all Hearts are absolutely strolling to this title, I mean, they're 16 points clear just now. I think Queen of the South would go to Tynecastle and get on top of them and pressure them. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see a Queen's win here, to be honest. They can attack at pace. Hearts, honestly, I feel at times that Hearts look lethargic almost. It's just, I don't understand how a team can win a league so poorly. And it feels weird to say that after we talked about Dundee United for almost the entirety of last season, kind of playing the same way. But just, I don't know whether it's been the whole fanfare of Hearts being in the Championship. It's everything we've been told to expect from them. We're going to demolish all these teams and they haven't. It's just a whole host of things. But I just feel every time I see them, they're just not impressive at all. And I feel that Queen of the South desperately need 3 points to keep in touch with that playoff match, because you just talked about the gap opening up in League Two. It could happen very quickly in the Championship with a couple of swinger results. So absolutely, I think Queen of the South need the points. Would I be surprised to see Hearts nick a 1-0, get an early goal and close up the shop? No, I wouldn't. They will take anything to just get out of the Championship at this point, and if they do that with another draw, I honestly don't think they'll care at this point.
No, and we spoke about it with obviously our pals at This Is My Story podcast when Liam was on, getting the job done. But obviously within that, Ross, there is massive discussion which has already taken place and will continue to take place, I'm sure, as long as Robbie Nielsen's in charge. But anyway, they are getting the job done, and that'll be an interesting tie. Right, League One on Saturday. Obviously, it's going to be a really difficult time, especially for League One and League Two clubs, with the amount of fixtures that are taking place. So it'll be fascinating to see how clubs got on. I think there could be a few more, I guess, quote-unquote shocks, if you will, over the course of the coming weeks. Ross, I'm going to fire straight back to you, if that's okay, just with your standout game in League One. What tie is standing out to you?
Yep, so I will unsurprisingly stick with Airdrie at the Penny Cars, and they're at home to Partick Thistle. I said that Thistle would really have looked for a kind of statement win against Cove Rangers. That didn't come. They drew one each. But I think in this game, we've talked about Airdrie at length throughout this podcast. I just feel like I feel like I'm going to keep saying it. I feel like I'm just waiting for Thistle to get that one big result, similar to what we're saying about Forfar, be it a freak goal that gets them 3 points, or it's just a horrific goal line scuffle and they hang on to the result, I feel like as soon as they get that, they will take off. And honestly, I think they could end up comfortably second. For me, I don't know if I'm just reading too much into Airdrie last week, but I just feel like there's not enough there to convince me that they will, stay comfortably in the playoffs. I think they'll be there or thereabouts, but I don't think they'll be comfortable. And I think, similar to what I'm saying about Hearts, Partick Thistle need to get out of League One this season, otherwise it becomes extremely difficult. Like Raith Rovers for a couple of years, it will be extremely difficult to get out of League One. So I think that, again, I said it last week, I think Ian McCall will be going hell for leather to try and get a result. And with the recruitment, as we talked about, that Thistle have done, there's no reason why they couldn't go and hassle Airdrie and get 3 points.
Yeah, exactly, Ross. Completely agreeing. On the flip side of that, I think Ian Murray will probably be making changes to the Airdrieonians side as well. I think, not just because you're saying it, imagine it was. What an influence. Sabatini back in the side, surely, with the fanfare that's going on around that as well. But Airdrieonians need a statement win, I feel, as well, off the back of last week, and just with like I say, the general fanfare around their season so far and the anticipation, if you will, of what's expected of them. I think this is a really, really intriguing game, and I'm really looking forward to it. On the flip side of that, my game of the weekend, Montrose at home to Clyde. Ross, you're shaking your head. I completely understand why. I mean, we're probably going to end up saying this week on week until the season's over, but a potentially massive game for both sides. I think Montrose want to not only solidify their spot in the promotion playoffs, but get that momentum going. We harp on about the difference and the importance of momentum in the lower league playoffs, and I think Montrose need that. And obviously, with things starting to tighten up slightly as well, the likes of Thistle, Ross, if they get a good result and things like that, it could flip everything on its head. And obviously, on the flip side of that, is Clyde, who are desperate for a win. Clyde are obviously, they've got a side full of a lot of youth. They've tried to bring in a couple of experienced players, but it's not looking great for Clyde, to be honest with you, which is obviously, as two Clyde fans, is difficult for us to say and admit. Obviously, we're still holding out hope, but looking at it objectively and taking a step back, it's looking really difficult. But you never know, Ross. This has been a fixture in previous years that Clyde have. It's been very sink or swim for Clyde in previous years. Clyde have went there and got absolutely battered some years, whereas they've went there and ran away with the 3 points. So who knows? Like I say, and even if Clyde managed to pick up a victory on Tuesday night, depending on what their team looks like, it might give the squad a bit of confidence as well. Regardless of what you're playing in, that winning feeling is always quite important, especially when you've got a young side as well. So yeah, I'm sure it'll be another entertaining League One weekend, Ross. And finally, before we get to your questions, League Two. Ross, what game stands out in League Two for you?
I'm sure that a lot of people are going to spit their juice or beer or coffee or tea or whatever you're drinking when you're listening to this podcast when I say this. I think it's for the implications, not because I think it'll be a good game. Is Albion Rovers versus Annan Athletic. There are currently 3 points separating Albion Rovers in 9th and Annan in 7th. Annan and Cowdenbeath, for that matter, will be absolutely desperate not to get sucked into the kind of relegation mix. I think that, and I've said it, I think last week before the league's kicked back off, I'm really worried for Albion Rovers. We've talked all season about, again, how poor Brecon have been. I think they're in a better position now than Albion Rovers are. Granted, Rovers have made a couple of good signs in the window, just at the end of the kind of loan period there. But there's just something about Annan. We see it every season. There's just something about them. Maybe it's because we hold a very dear place in our hearts, but it could be a horrible draw. I don't think that really Annan will care. I think Albion Rovers will be pushing for a win, but for Annan to get a draw, I think they'll be happy with that, and it just separates them as far away as possible from the bottom of that league. There's a potential there for it to be a kind of barnstorming for both of them to go hell for leather, try and get 3 points. But I think they'll probably both be a little bit conservative and try and maybe just take a point away each and carry on kind of dueling back and forth for kind of basically just safety.
I know it's an interesting one, Ross, because on the flip side of that, you'd think that, I've said the word flip and alarming amount in this podcast, is that you would think that they could both be relatively conservative. However, you would also think that they could just completely go for it, nothing to lose, and just go for it. That's the game that we're hoping for. But yeah, it will be very interesting. For my game of the weekend in League Two, I'm going to stick with a couple of sides that we've spoken about quite a lot over the course of this season and even this podcast. And that's Edinburgh City at home to Stenhousemuir, a game that could potentially play a big part in shaping how the promotion playoffs look. Edinburgh City, obviously, with a victory, could climb into the promotion playoffs. And Stenhousemuir, if they go away, then I guess cause a little bit of an upset, if you want to call it that, could be well back in the promotion playoff mix. And this has got a draw written all over it for me, to be honest. I know Edinburgh City, we've spoken about it, went away, got a great result up at Borough Briggs. But for me, there's just something about this Stenhousemuir team that Davy Irons is putting together. It's just got a nice mix about it. It's got a good feel about it. And I think given time and given the correct resources, it could end up, if it not this season, the next season definitely challenging to get back up to League One. So yeah, this is a really intriguing tie for me, and it's got a draw over it for me. So yeah, and plenty of other exciting games as ever, which we'll be talking about next week when we chat about the results on the podcast. It's time to get to the questions now before we sneak off and watch some Scottish Cup action. Right, so we're going to start off, and just thanks to everybody on Twitter and the Reddit community that have submitted questions as ever. We're going to kick off with the Reddit. We've just got, I would probably maybe call this a comment, or even a question from Hayley Renard, obviously a Clyde supporter, listener to the podcast. Do we need to talk about the weekend's results? I'm assuming talking about Clyde, we agree with that. We've already made our feelings clear. Scottish Cup tonight is going to be very interesting for non-league sides. Have they even been permitted to train before this? Obviously, the SPFL sides have been training, granted not a lot. However, I'm actually not sure whether the Highland League sides have. I don't even know if they have, and if they have, it might even just be one session due to the testing capabilities that have had to come in as well. They might only have been able to get tested for the games themselves. So it'll be interesting, like Ross and I discussed at the top of the show when we were talking about the Scottish Cup, interesting to see how the results kind of shape that as well.
Yeah, again, I could be wrong on this, but I have a feeling that clubs were asked to have testing performed first, and then they were allowed a training session and then to play. But don't quote me on that because I'm not sure that is correct. On the weekend result for Clyde, do I want to talk about it? Do you know what? Let's, because it's the one and only time that I'm going to, and I will be diplomatic. I can see the fear in your face. I'll try and be as diplomatic as I can. Okay, so yes,
the weekend, is yours.
the weekend result was poor. I think would be a very generous word. Incredibly poor, incredibly flat. But it doesn't just stem from a poor performance. Danny Lennon has not been backed well. He has not been given funds, be it that there's no money there or whatever it may be. The recruitment has not been good enough. We actually, the three of us had this discussion in our group chat. I can't even remember if it was today or yesterday. Was the strategic partnerships, I feel, is the right way to go and not the quote teams that we've discussed, and that's fine. But that's fine if clubs are taking maybe 2 or 3 young guys in to just kind of pad out their squad. You know, if they've got a wee gap in a position, fill that, give a young guy some game time, that's absolutely fine. But doing what Clyde have done this season and just launch young guys into their team thinking that's going to be a stopgap to replace what they've lost from last season is just not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not enough to survive. And I honestly believe at this point it could very well end up seeing Clyde back in League Two. It's just, you look at guys like David Mitchell, David Goodwillie, Ali Love, talented guys, but they cannot carry a squad. You know, Tom Lang as well to throw him into the mix. You know, you can't just ask those 3-4 guys to carry a whole squad and a whole team on their own. I can't see this in any other way. Something has to be done at Clyde. There has to be change. And that has been a horribly scary word for the people in charge at Clyde for years, is change and progression. And those are two things that I don't see happening at Clyde. And it is to the absolute detriment of the supporters and of the club. And for as long as it carries on, this is the start of it, I feel, as another downward spiral. I think it was when you used the analogy, Dylan, when we were talking off podcast, was Clyde goes through kind of waves almost, have a year to 18 months of really good success like that. Everything was going well. Everybody was kind of in unity. The club, managed to achieve promotion from League Two. And I feel as if now we're just starting to hit the kind of crest of the wave to start falling back down. And I don't want that to happen. I don't think any Clyde fan wants that to happen. But there has to be change. And it has to be in how the club is run, how recruitment is conducted, be it if there's no funds, why is there no funds, what are they doing to raise funds? All of these questions have to be asked, and someone has to start asking them and not being afraid to keep asking them if they're not getting answered. And that is the only way things will improve at Clyde.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some people at the top end of the club have to open their ears to new suggestions and new ideas and things like that as well. But very well said, Ross. Amen to that. Right, so like I say, got another few questions to get through. I'm going to amalgamate a couple of questions here. Part of the question from Moan the Thistle, obviously a Thistle fan, and also Tito1872, obviously a friend of the podcast who asks a lot of great questions. Thank you again for your question. This one, Ross, I guess yet again I'm combining both questions here. How do lower league fans feel about the cup returning with the fixture congestion? And alongside that, should the cup even have been played with the tight fixture congestion? What do you feel about that?
I feel it should just rename the question session just the Tito section of the podcast. I feel like every week they're just asking questions to get on the podcast. No, I'm totally joking.
And keep it coming.
Absolutely. I'm both kind of pro and con Scottish Cup for what's left of the season. I think that if it had gone the way of an 18-game season, the Scottish Cup would have been absolutely fine. In a 22-game season where teams like Clyde, like Cowdenbeath have got so many games to try and cram in, I don't feel that it's the way to go. I really don't. I think that it leaves a lot of teams, particularly in the part-time arena, really struggling. I think you'll find that to fulfil fixtures, guys have got part-time or full-time jobs and playing football part-time and all these kind of things. And we talked about it there, Highland League teams, they haven't even to be trained. We don't think have been able to train. Is that the most competitive game you're going to be able to see? Is that going to play to its full potential? All these ties, you hope so. But it's not fair to expect guys to have not played, potentially some of them for, nearly 3 months, to be playing at their kind of maximum. I'm glad to see the Scottish Cup coming back, but I feel like, was it absolutely necessary to play it for the rest of the season? Could we have done without it to make sure the league was done? Considering especially everything that was made of the fact of what happened last year, with promotions and relegations, did the Scottish Cup have to happen? Surely that would have been the priority, was to sort that out and make sure it was done properly and fully, instead of clubs, potentially running out of steam if they go on a cup run. I mean, I'm making the assumption that any clubs do. But if any club goes on a cup run, that's additional games on top of what they've got. And for part-time teams, that could be an absolute killer.
I don't want to sound too cynical about it, funnily enough, when it comes to Scottish football. I think it was about money. It was about the governing bodies with the partnerships with William Hill and other sponsors. It was about getting it done. Whatever it looked like, whatever it took, it was about meeting contractual obligations. I feel like, again, I might be completely wrong. And if anybody at SFA or anybody in these sponsors is listening, then tell us if we're wrong here. But again, I'm just looking at it maybe from a different perspective, in the sense that I've got a funny feeling in order to meet certain, things and contracts and whatnot, I think the Scottish Cup maybe had to be played, and obviously the potential of, big Scottish Cup ties at Hampden as well, whether they even be at Hampden, because obviously Hampden has to get ready for the Euros and things as well. I mean, Ross, we've spoke about it before. We spoke about it on our away days. double podcast. If you're not listening to that, go back and have a listen. We spoke about some of the... Thanks very much. I try my best. We spoke about so many great away days in the Scottish Cup, for example. And I love the Scottish Cup. I love the Challenge Cup as well. I mean, if anybody's, watching, obviously, Paul, we had some technical issues. We didn't get the video up last week. We're going to try and get it up this week. I'm actually wearing a Scottish Cup, a Challenge Cup final jersey as we speak. I love the Challenge Cup, love the Scottish Cup. But for this season, just can it. Just finish it and start afresh next season. And that's what I would have done anyway. But yeah, moving on there, Ross. Moan the Thistles asked a couple of extra questions as well, which we're probably not going to get to on this week's show, but we're definitely going to cover those things over the course of the coming weeks. You talk about, they're talking about what if a championship side kicks up a bit of a fuss about relegation due to short season. That's the compromise that we're having to make, isn't it, to get through all of the all of the fixtures, for example. We're going to head over to Twitter now, Ross, just for the last couple of questions before we finish up this week's podcast. And I'm going to roughly stay on the kind of Scottish Cup, if you will. Like I say, it might be slightly outdated by the time we get this out, but Scottish Football at SFitboz is asking, given the amount of time that lower league clubs have had off, especially the Highland League clubs, do you see any real chance of potential cup upsets? I mean, ultimately, the question I'm going to ask you is, do you see any potential Highland League clubs causing any upsets?
I think certainly the kind of suspension of football has maybe not completely flatlined the chance of it, but I think there's a significantly reduced chance you'll see it, to be honest, especially any of the teams that's playing a championship or a full-time team. I'm not writing them off. That's the absolute magic of the cup. That's one of the big pros for having the cup on. I've just talked there about all the kind of cons for it. It's a big pros. We all love to see a team like a Lowland or a Highland League team or a proverbial wee team, as it were, go on a great cup run. We all love to see it. So I would like the very small optimist in me would like to say there is still a chance, but there will be a significantly reduced chance, I would think.
I would agree with you there. And just before we move on to the final question, I could see Bora Rangers giving Hearts a game and potentially being a big upset. And Ross, moving very nicely onto our final question of the podcast, and it comes from our good friends at the This Is My Story podcast, obviously the Hearts focused podcast. You can get them on all your podcast networks and especially on YouTube. We've had the guys on before, but on YouTube, the kind of pre and post match stuff is brilliant. If you want to just grab a couple of beers on a Saturday and watch them chat about Hearts, it's very interesting. Now, the guys have asked, hi guys, what are your thoughts on Hearts now having lost or dropped points to every team in the Championship except Ayr United, including losing and drawing with both of the part-time teams? Is it really acceptable? I mean, we've touched on that before. Is this really acceptable for Hearts? And as neutrals, what do you feel is Hearts' biggest problem? So, to be honest, Ross, we've actually earlier on in the podcast, we kind of touched on whether it's acceptable or not. So I think we'll kind of skim over that. But I guess what the bit of the question I really want to get to and ask you is, what do you feel is Hearts' biggest problem at the moment?
I know you said you'll skim over it, and that's fine. I'll just make a quick point. It's acceptable. Did anyone really think Hearts were going to come down and be unbeaten all season? Really? Did they expect them not to drop points to anyone?
And as neutrals, Ross, I mean, we're looking at 16 points clear at the top of the league. Another title in comes for Robbie Neilson. I know, it's two Clyde fans here trying to lecture Hearts fans on what success is, but I mean, 16 points clear at the top. At this point, Ross, I would say it is acceptable.
Them dropping points to anyone's acceptable, with the exception of Brendan Rodgers, Celtic and Rangers. Never mind. Teams are going to drop points. Right? Teams are going to drop points. It was going to happen. No matter what noise that Hearts fans made when Hearts came into the Championship, Hearts were going to drop points at some point. It was going to happen. Whether they had played better football, potentially more appealing football, I should say, under Robbie Neilson, or whether it's been the case as it has been and they've maybe not played as well and dropped points, they were going to drop points regardless. Whether it's acceptable is probably for Hearts fans to answer, to be honest. It sounds like a cop-out, but we're not Hearts fans. So for me, I would expect every team to drop points at some point this season. I just don't think that teams can sustainably manage that unless you're, hundreds of millions of pounds in your club and all these kind of things. What is Hearts' biggest problem? I feel like we've answered this a couple of times. I think there's actually 2 points. I think the first is recruitment. I saw, and it might have been Liam, it was one of the guys on the podcast talking about Gary Mackay-Steven. Doesn't appear to have turned up in a Hearts shirt as yet. There's been a couple of players that the finger's been pointed at. Andy Halliday having been one of them. Again, maybe not performed to his full potential or what was expected of him in a Hearts jersey. And just generally, I think the tactics let the side down at times. Hearts have got a squad full of really talented players that we all know are good, Premiership level players, and it is just not happening. I don't know if it's just the team's not set up to play to these guys' strengths, whether they're just not buying into it. There's just something not right. And ultimately, it boils down to me as we argued about this at the time. Is Robbie Neilson the problem? I'm going to say possibly. And there's actually just been a manager who's left his job down south that I think should put the absolute fear of God into Robbie Neilson now and Alex Neil.
No, I think you're spot on. I think there was maybe a lot of Aberdeen supporters were suggesting something similar. But yeah, Ross, just to finish up on this and obviously to conclude this week's podcast, I think cohesion at a lot of levels is Hearts' biggest problem. I think that there's been this illusion, if you will, that there's a game plan at Hearts on and off the park, but it just keeps to the waters are so muddy at the moment, and all the good that Anne Budge has done and all the good she is doing or whatever, there has to be a point where there is a 5-10 year plan there's no panic put into it. Whatever happens, because you're following a strategy. You either do that or you go from every 12 to 18 months, changing manager, changing players, etc. See, whatever you do, that's fine, because there's so many different sides across the country, up and down, that are doing it their own way, and it's working and it's not working. But I think Hearts need to find a way to try and get some type of unity in the club and the supporters, because at least let the supporters know what you're trying to do, really, and what you're wanting to do over the course of the coming years.
Yeah, I think unity is probably the absolute key word, not just because Zack Snyder's Justice League has been released, but also because I think it is the absolute kind of key for Hearts across the board this year. I think that Robbie Neilson, his players need to get on side. I think the supporters need to get on side, and I think the board all need to start singing from the same hymn sheet if they're going to have any chance of going back up into the Premiership and being a top 3, top 4 side again.
Yeah, you're spot on, and I look forward to the HBO Max Talking Lower League Director's Cut to be released sooner rather than later.
Those could be like, if we were to do something like that, it could be like one of those weird YouTube videos that goes on for like 10 hours plus.
I think a lot of people would rather watch that Netflix show that's just a fireplace, Ross, for 10, 15 hours. And on that note, we've got some games to watch. Ross, thank you very much, as ever. Loved it. We got through loads in a relatively decent space of time. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for all your questions. Keep them coming, and keep an eye on our social media channels at TB Lower League on Twitter, Talking Lower League on Instagram and LinkedIn. And remember, keep the questions coming. Any thoughts, suggestions, anything at all, please let us know, because we really appreciate all your input. And we want to try and make it as interactive as possible, if you want to call it that. So thanks very much, everybody, and we'll chat to you all next week.